Hello and welcome to the World Wanders podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the World Wanders podcast. Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by you, the listeners of the show. For those of you who have listened to the show for a while, you've probably heard these ads a couple of different times and ways, and something that we're really excited about is having this Patreon page, which is this platform where you're able to support us with just a small amount of money, and we're able to give back to you in a bigger way than just the podcast. So by joining our community on Patreon, you get cool things like one-on-one hangouts with Ryan and I, postcards from exotic places around the world, and much more. So if you want to join, head on over to patreon.com/theworldwanders. Thanks so much for your support. And another quick announcement before we dive into this episode of the show. We have an awesome online community that we've just started separate to our Facebook page. And we would love for all of you out there who are listening to the podcast to join us. And so you can find that on the show notes at theworldwanders.com, or you can just search World Wanders, a community for travelers, and we'll get you access. And it's lots of like-minded people who enjoy traveling the world. There's travel bloggers, digital nomads, people from all over who are just talking about all things travel. So we would love to see you there.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the World Wanders podcast. Today we are talking about balancing travel with work when you are living nomadically.
Yeah, so I think a good place to start is probably to talk about what nomadic life looks like.
Yeah, and this is something we've talked about a bit in the previous episodes, but the big change that's happened for us since the summer is just the volume of work we're doing has increased. So, especially on my plate, just taking on a much bigger role in some of my freelance work. So effectively working,
more than full time.
Yeah, like 50 hours a week. Whereas before, when we were traveling Asia, we definitely still put in quite a bit of work, but it was much more flexible, much less responsibilities, and more just like getting projects done. So it was much easier to go on Tuesday to the beach and then come back and work at night and, work on a Sunday, but then take a Monday off. So.
Yeah, so I think that this has changed a lot more for you. My workload has increased as well, but it hasn't increased in the same way. Like, it's increased in volume, but it hasn't increased in terms of like expectations from when I actually have to be working. Do you want to talk a little bit about the biggest things that have changed for you between, maybe working a 30-hour week and having a really flexible schedule and working like a 50-hour week and having a less flexible schedule?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's kind of pretty
obvious.
Obvious, yeah. What changed is just more work, and doing it at like more times.
Yeah, so I guess let me switch my question a little bit. Do you want to talk about like the way that you have integrated travel into your life in a different way?
Yeah, so when I started doing this, with this new opportunity came up, it was the summer, and we had planned out a couple months of travel kind of on our previous schedule, our previous way of life. And one of the beautiful things about working remotely is that you can still travel. You can still, do all this stuff. It's still much more flexible in terms of your day-to-day work. But we had all these plans. So we went to Eastern Canada. We went to the States. We went a couple different places down there, back to Canada. Now we're in Mexico. And I feel like with a full-time workload, moving around from place to place is just much harder and takes up a lot more of your attention and creates a lot more stress. Even last year when we were traveling Asia, we were traveling a little bit fast at the start, but it wasn't bad. It wasn't like super stressful. But now the immediate thing I noticed was like, oh God, like I need much more structure in my day-to-day life and much less movement around to actually get stuff done and be happy.
Yeah, I think though, thinking about to this time last year, I think we were finishing up our time in Macau and we had gone to Macau and then, we went to Hong Kong for a week, went back to Macau, went to China for a week, went to Chiang Mai. And I kind of remember after this like crazy October, November schedule that we had in our Asian travels, we arrived in Chiang Mai and we were so excited to just like stay for a week. Like I think the first day we took off, we just watched like Netflix all day because we're like, oh, we just need to like chill and settle. Like I think that no matter how much work you're doing, it does become more stressful to work around. No matter how much you're working, in a week, it becomes more stressful to move around constantly. Like, we're constantly keeping in touch with Shalini, who does the production of this podcast. Shout out Shalini. And, she's moving around a ton in her travels right now. And I'm just like, man, I can't even keep up to you. Like, you're making me tired with how much you move. But it's like so much different when you have all these responsibilities that you need to take care of. And that even includes, in Asia, putting out weekly podcast episodes, show notes, everything that comes with that, making sure we did all of our calls and we had Wi-Fi for that. Like that's another thing to coordinate. So I think it's just like this extra thing you have to think about. You have to plan for it.
Yeah, definitely. And so the big thing we learned as we were traveling was that it's much more enjoyable for us to really like slow things down and be able to feel like we're able to like, I don't know, sip a destination instead of chugging it. And that's even more so true about now. When we came down to Mexico City, our plan was to stay longer because we know there's a lot of stuff to do here. There's a lot of stuff to do in the country. And because of working a lot more, you can create that structure, but then it still gives us an opportunity to go out on the weekend and go check out some new area of the city, or the occasional weekend go take a trip because there's cheap flights to other parts of the country. So we just have to be a lot more conscious about the way we set up our life here, and it has to have. I don't think it necessarily has to have, but it's just much more calm, easy, and productive with a lot more structure involved. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So we've talked a little bit on the podcast about, what our current life situation looks like. So after our time in Canada and the US, we made our way down to Mexico City and we booked 3 weeks here, not really knowing what to expect. We'd heard great things. And it turns out we really like the city. So we've actually signed a 6-month lease and we have now moved into that apartment and we're getting settled here. We have memberships at a WeWork co-working space and we're kind of like making Mexico City our home. Which I think to a lot of people, they're kind of like, well, why didn't you just do that at home? Like, why didn't you just do that, in Canada? And I want to talk a little bit about that because I think that, for anyone out there who is living a more nomadic lifestyle or has the opportunity to, maybe you work online or work remotely and you're able to work from anywhere, but you work a lot. It can kind of seem like, oh, maybe I'll just, stay at home and bank my holiday time and then take my trip once a year, which that's amazing if that's what you're choosing to do. But if you have this opportunity to be nomadic, there's something really cool about being able to go to another country and kind of set your life up there. Because I feel like even though we're not moving cities every 3 days and we're not, going to a bunch of different countries, I feel like we're still getting this like taste of travel every single day. Do you want to talk a little bit about, kind of like on a day-to-day basis, what kind of like little travel things we get?
Yeah. And so first, just by saying like when people are saying, why don't you just do that at home? It's because the idea of like going somewhere else and getting an apartment and settling down doesn't seem like people are like, oh, if you're not going to move around, why not just stay home?
Yeah, exactly. Like it's more of, it's more of moving somewhere. It's like we've decided to move to Mexico City for 7 months as opposed to going traveling. And I think that, especially for, our parents and our grandparents, like older generations who never really did any of the things that we're doing. I think that, these gap year ideas and backpacking and going on 3 to 6 month backpacking trips as like a young 20 something has become a little bit more acceptable, especially in Canadian culture. But this idea of like, oh, I have my entire business online or everything I do is online, so I'm just going to go live in a new city is really, I think, kind of foreign to a lot of people. And I think that, we're surrounded by a lot of people who do that, but I think that in the bigger scheme of things, like most people aren't doing that type of thing.
Yeah. And then so just to get back to the kind of the first question was, the travel on a day-to-day basis. And the reasoning for coming to Mexico is that, yeah, we kind of get the best of both worlds. We can like set up a more steady life, but we can get that kind of like sense of adventure and new and unique things. And on top of that, it's less expensive. But yeah, so on a day-to-day basis, we walk to work, and walking around the city in Mexico City, it's always interesting. There's always like weird, chaotic stuff happening. There's street vendors all over the place selling all types of food. So you're seeing, all sorts of meat cooking on the street and all sorts of other interesting stuff happening. We get to go out and eat amazing food. All your day-to-day interactions are happening in Spanish. So it's kind of like, it's like a game you're playing where you have to learn all the new sounds to get the things you want. So,
and that's a weird experience too, compared to our time in South America. So when we were in South America, we really did a lot of Spanish lessons and we're really trying to learn Spanish. And I feel like sometimes now, my Spanish obviously has a base from there, and I'm continuing to learn more. And I find that my Spanish gets better and better every day. But it's sometimes really strange if I spend the whole day inside working, and obviously I do all my work in English, and then I come out and all of a sudden somebody speaks to me in Spanish and my brain's like, whoa, what? It's kind of like, okay, I've got to like fully switch gears. And it's a fun adventure to have that. Like, it's fun to be like, oh, right, I need to like talk to you in a different language to get what I need.
Yeah, I mean, this has always been to me the kind of standard. And what I mean by that is whenever I've met people who work from home and then they don't go anywhere, it's always been, I've always just been like a little bit confused. And this is not to like judge anybody or to like, I think a lot of people are like happy where they are. But like once you have that flexibility, you can just be like, oh, I'm going to move somewhere else. Yeah, that seems like the standard, the obvious. It's like sometimes I'm like, why do I have to explain to people why I want to spend 6 or 7 months in Mexico City? Like, I feel like if given that I work remotely, it would be more weird if I chose to just like, stay in Calgary, Alberta.
Yeah, especially like right now when it's like -8 and dark and cold.
Yeah, and I think too that's another thing that people underestimate about how much of an incentive the Canadian winter is to travel.
Yeah, definitely. I have a yoga friend who lives in San Diego, and she's like, do you just like not like cold weather? Like, I really like when the seasons change. I was like, I think the season changing is a little bit different where you live. I was like, I feel like you have no comprehension of how cold it is when it turns to winter.
Yeah, like the seasons changing in San Diego is like the nice calming waves lapping on the beach. Yeah. And the seasons changing in Alberta is like a 30-foot tsunami.
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah, so, one of the companies that we freelance for is called Praxis. Praxis has sponsored the podcast, so you guys have probably heard about them before. But I've talked to a number of different Praxis participants who have their apprenticeships where they work remotely. And I was talking to one of them, and she's like, I don't know why I'm staying in California when I could like go anywhere since I work online. And I was like, yeah, like you could even just go somewhere else in the States, like go check out a new city and, just have, an interesting experience where you can find new coffee shops and find new restaurants and maybe make new friends and meet new people and that sort of thing. Like, why not? If all your work is online, why not have that adventure? Yeah.
And then this kind of like draws back to the time frame that we chose to stay here. And the kind of a core of the conversation is like over the past year, we've had like varying work responsibilities and have stayed in various places for different periods of time. What do you think is like you were talking to someone who does work full time, but they do it remotely and they want to go out and start, traveling, seeing some new places, what do you think is like a good time frame to like plan to stay places?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that the first way to kind of answer that is to kind of look at what you like to do in a place and what you're hoping to achieve. So, are you wanting to just see a new city, or are you wanting to like create a community there? And I think that if you're just wanting to see a new city, I would say 2 weeks at the absolute minimum, but I think a month is a lot better. I think that a month really allows you to dig in, like find those restaurants that you like and then like revisit them. It almost become like, oh, this is the coffee shop I go to. And like now this barista like knows me by name and I've kind of like, I feel really like welcome and at home here. And I think that if you want to dig into the community more, I actually don't think a month is long enough. Lots of people say like a month is an ideal time for a place. And I think that for me, I'm very extroverted. I'm very social. I really like having, friends other than you in my day-to-day life. And I found, we've been in Mexico City for 6 weeks now, and we still haven't really made much of a community. And, part of that is the fact that our Spanish isn't fluent and it's a lot harder for us to just make friends. But we are starting to get to the point where, there's the gluten-free bakery that the only guy who speaks English like knows who we are now and like knows your order because you order the same thing every time and that sort of thing. And that stuff takes time. So I think it really depends what you're looking for. I'd say 2 weeks minimum. A month is really great. I kind of like the 2 to 3 month range. Like Chiang Mai felt like we left a little bit soon. Bali, Ubud, we spent 2 months, and I really liked that time frame. Like I felt like we were able to dig in a little bit more with that time frame, like get into more of a routine with the yoga studio and find places to get massages and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think the way you think about where you live is different depending on how long you're planning on staying there. So, like you said, building a community is something that was important to us. So staying somewhere for 6 months, you definitely feel this like, oh, I should go out and do things because that'll allow me to meet people that I can hang out with over the next few months, versus staying somewhere for 1 month and you don't do much for like the first 15 days. And you're like, you know what? There's like not much point in me like going to meet people because I'm just going to leave anyways. But for me, I think it's like a month minimum most places. The way we approached it, kind of starting from Chiang Mai and kind of incorporating that like, okay, we're going to settle in somewhere like 1 to 3 months, then go and do like 10 days somewhere or like a quick trip. And I think it for us at that time, it was easier for us to kind of like go, not dark, but like go a bit offline.
Go dark.
Whereas now we can't do that. So
I want to add something else to the mix. Like depending on where you're traveling to, I think that impacts it. Like when I think back to Asia and, our intentions for our Asian adventures, like I think that we did intend to stay places longer. And I think that Chiang Mai was somewhere that we wanted to stay longer. But then, the 30-day visa thing was a bit of an issue. And, with Bali, it was even a hassle to extend past 30 days, but I'm glad that we did. So I think that, something that makes Mexico a really great option for us is that we have 6 months here. It's the same with the US. Like the US is a really great place for us to, go visit because we can spend 6 months without a visa. I think that, if you're American, like looking into Canada or Mexico, because we all have 6 months through NAFTA, is like a really great option because then you don't have to move around as much. And you also don't have to worry about like, oh, I'm 21 days into this trip and like now I need to plan somewhere to leave and like where am I going to stay when I get back. And there's just a lot of logistics that kind of get involved with that when you have those kind of like visa issues.
Yeah, and then so I was trying to just like clarify my thoughts, but I feel like there's like a bit of a different travel philosophy between what we were doing in Asia and what we're doing now. Now it's kind of like we're staying somewhere, but we're definitely intending to go and check a lot more stuff out. So every weekend we go out and explore something new on Sundays. And then because we're in, the capital city of Mexico, it's a pretty big country, but Mexico City is pretty central. And when you're flying, the flights aren't too long to almost, to most places here. The flights aren't too long.
Yeah, I don't
So
think they're more than like 2 or 3 hours.
yeah, tops. And so you have access to like so many different places you can go. And over the course of 6 months, we're probably going to take 5-6 trips to different areas and get to see a bunch of the country. It's kind of like the hub and spoke approach to travel. And I think that it's that way to approach it is even better when you are working full time and have more responsibility than, if you're doing more freelance work and you're putting in that type of hours, but you've got a lot more, flexibility on your workload and can kind of like turn it down for certain periods if you want to go to countries that don't have that great of Wi-Fi. But Mexico especially, I think I just want to touch on how awesome of a place it is. Like if you're someone who does work remotely, you've kind of thought about traveling, but you're like, I've got a lot of work responsibilities. Mexico is super close, so you can always go back pretty quickly. It's affordable. You, even here in Mexico City, we're staying in like one of the nicest neighborhoods of the city, paying considerably less rent than we did in Canmore, Alberta. And, you can go out and eat awesome meals. You can travel around. Everything's quite affordable. Not, beach in Thailand cheap, but very affordable. And, you're right on the same time zone. So just has like so many good things to offer. And you can stay a while, practice Spanish, really invest and like do well at your work. You don't have to have any distractions because you got everything you need here. But kind of like get that like slow drip of travel. And then maybe afterwards you can say, oh, this has gone really well. You know what? I'm going to go to Lima, Peru for
10 days. Like go hike.
Like 60 days, like after, and go out somewhere different after that. Or you maybe decide like, hey, I just want to go back home.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to touch on, since we're talking about how to kind of balance this workload with travel, I was just thinking back to when we were in Chiang Mai and we had 1 month and we were working a lot in Chiang Mai because we kind of had like our first 2 months in Asia. We were doing everything we needed to do, but we weren't doing extra projects. And so one of the things that I think is important to consider, especially, depending on what your remote nomadic situation looks like is, as a freelancer, usually the less you work, the less money you make. So it's like very much like how much time you put in to your work is correlated with how much you get out. And when I think about like most of my nomadic friends, they do things like teach for VIP Kid or, graphic designers, freelance photographers. So they would be very much in the same boat. And I think that that's usually the case. And I found that something that was really tough about Asia was that, we would go on these kind of stints where we would be exploring a lot and you spend a bunch of money and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, I'm way backlogged on work and I got to do all these projects and I got to get all this stuff done, but you're never really getting ahead. And then we settled in Chiang Mai and I felt like because we only had a month, there was a lot of things that I wanted to do. And I remember feeling like a lot of pressure to see stuff on Sundays. And something that is different about being here in Mexico is knowing that we have a lot of time. I feel like it takes off a lot of this pressure. Like, there's a ton of stuff we haven't done here yet. Like a ton of stuff. Like we haven't hiked the volcanoes. We haven't seen the ruins. There's like most of the museums we haven't visited. And I don't feel like any pressure because I know that we've got a lot of time to get that stuff done. And it was the same when we were in Atlanta. I felt like it was really nice to be able to like settle into the city, get to know it slowly, and not feel like there was like this big time crunch to do everything.
Yeah. It's just like even last weekend we were able to go out and check out the NFL event that was happening here. It wasn't like, oh, we're only here for 6 weeks. We need to go see all the like big tourist attractions. We can just be like, oh, there's something nifty happening over there. Let's go like check that out. Or let's go just like get a coffee and hang out. And just kind of like slowly absorb a place instead of feeling like you have to rush out and go do a whole bunch of stuff. And I think the other thing too is that, or the other thing I want to comment on is whether it's freelancing or work, when you're doing whatever you're doing, you get a lot of like satisfaction and fulfillment out of doing it well. And so, travel for us is very satisfying. We enjoy it. But sometimes when you put yourself in situations where it's like, okay, I'm going to Asia, I'm going to be freelancing, and I'm going to try to go to Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Laos, Vietnam. I'm going to do all these countries in 6 months. You're moving around quickly and you're getting that experience of like eating new things, seeing new sites, experiencing new cultures. But there's going to be like a bit of a drag on you in terms of your self-esteem around work and your satisfaction and fulfillment around work. So for us, what I've found is really like slowing down our travels and using it more of like putting it much more into balance. Like, hey, it's fun to go out on a weekend day or like to go on a weekend trip and see something new and practice my Spanish and all that stuff. But I also get like a deep sense of satisfaction from doing my work well. And being steady in one place for a longer period of time allows me to do that a lot better, and allows us to find, I feel like, a much more like even balance between those two things.
Yeah, I think that you touched on something really important there with, having satisfaction in the thing that you do. And I think that, I mean, if you've listened to the podcast from day one, you know that we've been on quite a journey with this travel work experience. And it's taken us a long time to kind of find, roles and careers that we're interested in. And I would think it's safe to say that we're still very much developing those and kind of finding, exactly what we want to be doing. And I'm not sure that either of us want to be doing the same thing forever either. But I think kind of looking at where you're at, like we were, in 2011 at a place where we really needed to go out and travel with no responsibilities because we'd never really had that before. In 2014, when we went to South America, we were much more looking for some sort of fulfillment. Like I started my travel blog. We both started learning Spanish. You were really, really getting deep into your personal development. And I think that that's when we kind of discovered like, oh, using travel as this way to dig deeper into our personal lives is like a very valuable thing. And then, we kind of both took solo trips, and then we had our first like big move, or I guess you moved for university, but it was my first big moved to a different country, lived in Atlanta, had all these new experiences with that. And I found that, living somewhere was a lot different than traveling somewhere. And, since then we've transitioned into being nomadic. So we don't really have a home outside of the home where we actually live. So currently our home is Mexico City. And I feel like Asia was very much like this kind of experimentation. Like we tried, 10-day stint in KL where we, hustled and worked straight for 10 days and then had a little bit of, free time and explored a little bit more. And then we tried the 1 month thing. Then we tried the 2 month thing. And then we did, 3 weeks of straight travel in Japan. And I feel like we kind of, tested the waters a lot to find what actually worked. And for us with our workload, it's been really fulfilling to be quite settled, and then to like every Sunday we know we're going on an adventure somewhere in the city, and then every month we've kind of like booked a trip for the next couple of months. I think that it's really easy to kind of get into a work bubble and kind of get caught up in your regular routine, and I think that that's something that we talked a lot about, on old school episodes of the podcast is, how can you get out of your routine? And I want to talk about that in the context of Mexico City, because I think that regardless of where you are, it's really easy to get in routine. Like I think as humans, we kind of thrive on having a routine, like having your workspace, having your home space, having stuff that you do every day. And I found, we've been settling into routine, which has been nice, but how do we still make sure that we have these like travel experiences? We've already booked a couple of trips. So we're going on our first trip next weekend. And then we're planning a trip in January. We have a trip booked in February. And we're in the process right now of, planning our trip for March as well. So looking at the fact that it's like November and we've already got, and we've got our Christmas plans booked. So we've got, 4 trips on our radar between now and February. I think that kind of like allows us to settle into our routine, but also have something to look forward to. It's like, a new city that we're going to go visit, a new adventure that we're going to go have, and something that we're really like working towards. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think that having something like on your radar to do adds a lot. And yeah, so but for us, one of the great things about being in Mexico is that you can get cheap flights places. So it's really easy to book a flight to go somewhere on Friday night, come back Sunday night, and go check out a new, exciting, interesting part of the country. And I think it is something different about being somewhere new, is that like everything's kind of exciting. I remember just being in Atlanta, we went to so many different places while we were there because it was like the whole Southeast was like this like new world to us. So going to Savannah was cool, and going to Charleston was interesting, and even going to like Kennesaw was like, ooh, we're going to Kennesaw this weekend just to see what's out there. But like people
going to the Georgia Guidestones.
Yeah, going to the Georgia Guidestones, and like people who grew up there their whole life, it's like, oh, everything's just normal. Like, yeah, I went there for like a basketball tournament one time. There's nothing to see. Like a lot of people we met like had never been to a lot of the places we went to.
Some people hadn't even heard of the Georgia Guidestones.
Yeah. So being somewhere new, I feel like it just like illuminates everything, and it makes everything interesting and exciting. And I think we've come to like a much better balance in terms of routine. I think it's like a sense of freedom that you have. Whereas before, kind of just got into a work routine, and we like had to be in the office at like a specific time every day. And we live in Canada, so it's expensive to go do things. And you're, spending a lot of money going out on weekends, and you just feel like kind of trapped, like you're just running and you're like, what am I doing this all for? Whereas now there's so much more freedom. Yes, we've got like responsibilities now, especially like for me, but there's so much more freedom attached with that. Like I'm really passionate about the things I'm doing. I get a lot of fulfillment out of it. But I can also go do things that I want to do like on the weekend, and I can like afford to, go on a weekend trip, and I can afford to like go out for nice dinners, and, since it's remote, I can start work super early one day and then start work a little bit later the next day. It's not the type of thing where I have to like be up at the exact same time driving my car through traffic to be in the same building at the exact same time every day to make sure I'm looking like I'm productive.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really, really amazing to, talk to more and more people who are working remotely, being at a co-working space like we work, and seeing so many people who don't work in the traditional office, and, seeing how many opportunities there are to be able to add, more nomadicness. Is that a word? More nomadicness to life, and just more like travel to life because you have more freedom. Like I love the fact that if you work remotely, you could take a weekend trip to, I don't know, if you're from like New York, you can like go to Florida. Like, why not? I can go to Florida if I want. But yeah, like you said, that was one of the great things about living in Atlanta. It was like somewhere that's new, but it's very much, a city, and you were working full time in an office. And, I was working quite a bit, but we still took the opportunity to explore so much of that area. And I feel like, we've explored more of that area than a lot of people who are local. Like we did a road trip in October for a friend's wedding, and our friend who's from South Carolina, who's now lived in Georgia for like 2 or 3 years, he's like, it's my first time in Mississippi and my first time in Louisiana. And I was like, what? How can you grow up like 4 states over and like have never been here?
Yeah, and I think that's a little bit to do with, staying 6 months somewhere is a long time relatively compared to travel, but it's a short time relative to like someone who spends their whole life there. And it kind of balances out. Like, yes, it gives staying 6 months here takes off the pressure, and we can say like, oh, hey, we're not too super stressed about going to see all this stuff because we've got time. But, we do know that at some point we're going to leave. So we do want to go see all the stuff.
Yeah, like I was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to, live in this area of the world again. So I might as well see as much as I can see while I'm down here. I guess though it makes me think about like, I'm like, oh, you haven't seen 4 states over, and like I haven't been to like Manitoba.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the exact same thing, except there's just more cool stuff to do in Louisiana than there is in Manitoba. Manitoba's also a long way further away.
Yeah, no, definitely that's true. I mean, Canada's a massive, massive country. Yeah, but I think the last thing that I want to say is that, if you're somebody who maybe is in a traditional work situation and you don't have the opportunity to, live in Mexico like we are, think about your own backyard and what kind of, travel experiences you can add. Because I think that after all of our travel experiences and realizing how much cool stuff there was around Atlanta and then, in Asia, when we came back, like we explored quite a bit of Canada this summer. And I felt like it was really cool to be able to finally say that I've been to Toronto. I'm like a proper Canadian, and been to Montreal and explored more of Vancouver Island and that sort of thing. So I think that, you can add travel to your life wherever you are in the world, even if you are tied to where you're from. Look at the places that tourists are going and book weekend trips and do that stuff. It can be really, really fulfilling.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you have anything else that you want to touch on this topic?
Nope. Covered it.
Yeah, so a bit of a convoluted conversation. If anyone has any questions about anything that we talked about today, definitely send us an email at info@theworldwanders.com, or pop on over to Facebook and join our private Facebook community at World Wanders, a community for travelers. You can just search it and then ask to be let in, and we'll let you in. And we would love for you to join us.
Thank you for listening, as always.
Bye.
To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanders.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanders.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanders or on Twitter at WorldWanders1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.